So welcome, Michael.
Thank you
Lovely to see you.
very much for inviting me.
You're welcome. How are you today?
I'm fine. Yeah, it's a beautiful damp May day, and we've needed the rain, so it's very welcome.
Yeah, lovely. Before we delve into your background, it'd be lovely to hear your response to my opening question, which is what is bringing you joy right now?
Well, it's May. I mean, for goodness sake, fresh green leaves, the world is singing. It's just wonderful. Something I do quite a bit is walks, and I like long walks, 10 miles more. And I've been walking with a friend recently. We have a long-term plan to cover the whole of the Icknield Way, which is an ancient path around East Anglia. And been walking bits of the Icknield Way recently, and
Mhm.
it's just gorgeous. So
Mm,
yes, walking, I'd say, in nature.
great. It sounds stunning. Yeah,
Mm,
wonderful. Lovely. So it'd be really nice to hear about your background, but I wonder if you could say a few words about what you're up to at the moment and trace back to how you got into mindfulness in the first
okay,
place.
it's a big journey. Uh,
Yeah, just you know, an
I'll tell
abridged
you the
version
story.
would be great.
So, the most recent thing is this book, From Mindfulness to Wakefulness, which has been brought up by Wiley, um,
Great.
who brought up my book, The Mindful Workplace, way back when. So that's what I've been currently interested in, and it's around extending the conversation around mindfulness from, you know, just relaxation, calm, dealing with stress, anxiety, chronic pain into a much broader context, which is akin to awakening.
Mhm,
I talk about it as being a matter of degree. Wakefulness is something that occurs by degree.
mhm,
And my suggestion there is that if full awakening, which is the background to mindfulness, it's what mindfulness was taught for originally by the Buddha 2,500 years ago to help people to awaken, what we used to call gaining enlightenment, which is badly expressed.
mhm,
Waking up to how things really are. Wakefulness is degrees of that. So, if awakening, enlightenment, is the perfection of compassion, then wakefulness is an increase in compassion. If awakening is the perfection of ethical behavior, then increase in wakefulness comes from just behaving a bit more ethically. And if enlightenment is the experience of awe and joy in every moment, then wakefulness is just an increase in one's access to awe and joy, and so on, like
mhm,
that.
mhm,
So that's the way I speak about it. And the book is about, how to increase your wakefulness.
mhm.
So that's been interesting me recently.
Mm,
Oh,
congratulations on that publication.
oh, it's
Yeah,
a
look
pleasure.
forward to reading
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm delighted with it. Delighted to have another book out. Prior to that, I guess most of my work was really focusing on leadership, strangely. I'll have to tell the story really to show where this all comes from. Starts out in 1977 when I wandered into a Buddhist center for the first time and learned to meditate. In those days, there were no apps, of course, there were reel to reel tape recorders, for goodness sake. So we didn't even have audio guidance to take away with us. You just, sat down cross legged on the floor in some discomfort in my case and were invited to follow your breath for 40 minutes. So that was the way it went to start with. And I really struggled with that. But somehow I kept going. And that led me more and more deeply into Buddhism. And I joined what was then called the Western Buddhist Order, which I really dedicated my life to. In the context of that, I had the good fortune to set up a fair trade company with a group of friends that came to be quite successful in the end. At its peak, it was selling 10 million sterling, giving away £1 million a year to worthy causes. It was quite
Mm,
successful. I'd given my shareholding away. I didn't really want to be an owner, and I left the company and went on to do more mindfulness teaching, meditation teaching, and Buddhism teaching. That's really where my heart was at that stage. So I helped to co-found the Cambridge Buddhist Centre and worked in that context for many years, teaching meditation here in Cambridge. Then I went on to do a whole bunch of other things in the context of the Western Buddhist order, helping to found other centers, retreat centers, working with the central organization in various ways. And then I decided at some point way back, I think it must have been in the late 90s, that I wanted to make a change. And I was looking around for some kind of qualification that would enable me to earn a living, because I'd just been living as a sort of supported meditation teacher. I had no savings or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I came upon this master's program that had been set up at Bangor University, where they were teaching the clinical applications of mindfulness and offering a master's degree. And I thought that was extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed a perfect fit. So I joined that program. I think I was in the second year that it had been running. I got my degree quite quickly and went on to teach on the program. So I was teaching at Bangor. And that introduction to clinical mindfulness was really revelatory for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'd been teaching in other contexts with other intentions, really, and now discovered something very, very new and different, as well as a developing evidence base. Although at that stage, there were only about 20-odd scientific papers available. Now there are many, many thousand. And you could read them all, and we kind of expected to know them all.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, there was an evidence base, especially through the work of Siegel, Williams, and Teasdale, of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which was really producing the first good quality evidence for the efficacy of mindfulness training over time. It was definitely demonstrating fairly unequivocally, with 2 large-scale randomized controlled trials, that 8 weeks of mindfulness training could help people who are subject to relapsing depression, help them not to relapse. So, you know, that turned my life upside down, really. I thought, you know, I can follow this. I can contribute to this. I can work in this world. And that's what I did. So I got very much onto that track, teaching mindfulness initially, working at the Center for Mindfulness in Bangor on a part-time basis, helping to train NHS clinicians and others in the use of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and similar approaches. I got into teaching the Buddhist background to traditional mindfulness approaches on the masters. And I was approached by Wiley, who'd come to the center looking for writers because they knew that something interesting was going on here in the mindfulness world. Editor got in touch with us and asked, you know, who would write. And I thought, well, I could write about work because, you know, I'd had this background as an entrepreneur, setting up a company. I've set up a few little ventures over the years. And I know a little bit about that. And I know more now these days about mindfulness because I've been studying it clinically. You know, I know about the evidence base a bit, and I know how it works a bit. I've got some ideas. So I wrote The Mindful Workplace, and that launched me into a completely different career. And then that's what I've been doing subsequently. It morphed eventually into leadership, into working with executive coaches, doing executive coaching, and so on.
That's quite a journey and quite a change. That switch from the Western Buddhist order to a more secular form of practice. What was that like in terms of how it resonated with you? Because you were deeply embedded in Buddhist teachings. What was that difference like for you?
Yeah. There was something about the mindfulness approaches which was extraordinarily clear psychologically. Now, look, Buddhist psychology is pretty fantastic and pretty worked out. And there's a really, really excellent tradition of Buddhist psychology, which I have huge regard for. However, there are difficulties with Buddhist psychology in the contemporary world. The way in which the mind is understood in traditional Buddhist psychology doesn't entirely map onto the way in which we conceive of the mind in terms of contemporary psychological thought. The mechanisms are slightly different. We can't always exactly pin down which mechanisms are being referred to in traditional Buddhist psychology. We haven't got absolutely precise translations of some of the terms that are being used. Whereas contemporary psychology, as it's understood these days, has a much higher degree of precision so far as, you know, English speakers are concerned.
Yeah.
So we can get hold of it and use it much more readily.
Hmm.
And it links into developing neuroscience conversations in interesting and useful ways. Now, I'm no neuroscientist, but I can kind of grasp some of the basics. And they're very useful as didactic means, ways
Hmm.
of teaching, to be able to refer to brain state changes in various ways. Really helps people to get what one is talking about.
Hmm.
Don't lean too heavily on it, but it's helpful. So I guess the degrees of precision that were available by being able to use Western psychological language to talk about what was happening when people engaged with their attention in a different kind of way, I found that very, very helpful.
My understanding of Buddhism, having been involved with Friends of the Western Buddhist Order for quite a long time previously, is that there are different traditions
Yes.
with different perspectives, whereas mindfulness seems to be fairly unified across the
Yes.
board, being in a way a new field, if you
Yes.
like.
Yes. Yes. More so, certainly, than has grown up over the 2,500-year-old Buddhist tradition.
Hmm.
I think we're beginning to see shifts and divergences within the mindfulness world, but that's kind of another story. It does afford a kind of clarity, I think. That's the most valuable thing about it. It's easier for participants to get their heads around when one speaks in that kind of language.
Yeah, certainly. I was just wondering if you could say a little bit about how you see mindfulness now. Do you have a working definition? I know it's not easy to sum it
Yeah,
up in a few words, but
yeah, yeah,
uh, for somebody who might be listening to this, who's maybe relatively new
yeah,
to mindfulness, what's your elevator pitch, if you like?
yeah. I'd say it's about being aware of what's going on right now.
Hmm.
That's the simplest thing, really. What's
Hmm.
going on right now? What's going on in your own mind? What's
Hmm.
going on in your feelings? What's going on in the world around you? What are your thoughts up to? What are you sensing? So it's about staying present to that whole variety of experience and any element within it. Another part of it is being able to switch between elements. So not only being caught up in being aware of thinking, which many people are. Many people would find themselves constantly thinking, often unaware that that is going on. And then if they become aware of that going on, that really can preoccupy their attention. But being able to switch your attention to what's happening in more embodied parts of your life, that capacity to switch your attention is an important piece of mindfulness.
Hmm. Yeah. And you've mentioned that word wakefulness. Do you think wakefulness is a more helpful term?
At the moment,
Um,
not, but
mhm.
I'd hope it would maybe become so. I have a kind of earnest wish that I have set a tiny pebble rolling down a hill and it might encourage some bigger boulders to move. So
Mm,
um, I, I, I think it could be valuable, but of course
mhm.
at the moment it's so obscure. Yeah,
Yeah. I think sometimes maybe people get a bit fed up with hearing about mindfulness. It's like
yes, yeah,
everywhere, and it's like
yes.
mindfulness, mindfulness, that. And I mean, obviously, some people don't really understand it because it's actually really quite a deep practice. But wakefulness seems possibly a little bit fresher and a bit more to the essence of
Well,
what it's
I'd
about,
hope so.
perhaps.
I really do hope so because it includes so much more.
Mm-hmm.
It does bring in things like the cultivation of positive emotional states, making connections with other people, the practice of ethics as an actual practice, the decision to
Mm-hmm.
actually undertake a practice of ethics, for example, the cultivation of greater compassion and kindness in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So, all these things are gently implied in mindfulness for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but a path to increasing wakefulness can make them very much more explicit.
Yes, yes. Feels like a more expansive word for. the
Yeah.
practice and
Yeah.
what you're trying to do. Yeah. And how has that conception changed from when you first encountered all of this to how you see it now? Have you seen a huge shift in the field over these
Oh,
years, apart from the science and the neuroscience and just how people see mindfulness? Do you think it's
yeah. I mean,
become
it's been
something different?
an unbelievable shift. You
Hmm.
know, when I first started back in the late 1990s, it was still incredibly obscure. You know, there were very, very few of us engaged in the clinical work. You could probably know most people in those
Hmm.
days in the UK, certainly, who were engaged in the clinical work. There weren't that many researchers in the United States. You could be aware of most of them. And, you know, I started by around 2004 to begin to try to bring it into workplaces and so on. People just didn't know what you were talking about, hadn't a clue. Um, Nowadays, the word has become completely beyond mainstream, really. It's just part of life now. And
Hmm.
it's massively misunderstood, hugely
Hmm.
misunderstood.
Hmm.
So you can buy bath salts that are branded as mindfulness, aromatherapy oils branded as mindfulness.
Hmm.
You know, the word is associated with relaxation, chilling out, with spa days and all that kind of thing. And really, it has nothing to do with any of that. The apps have driven a massive explosion. And unfortunately, kind of missold it
Hmm.
as a way to relax. And for many, many people, it just doesn't work. You
Hmm.
know, many people come to the practices with the hope and intention that they will be able to empty their minds, get rid of their thoughts, because many people will find their thoughts troubling and their minds, unsettling. And they want to be able to settle and to calm. And you know, the app's really, by and large, unable to deliver that. I mean, there are probably some cases of people who would use an app and find rapid benefit as a result. But
Hmm.
the data on reuse of an app, the number of people who subscribe versus the number of people who use them frequently, there was a massive gap.
Hmm.
So although it's now very, very widespread, unfortunately, because it's been missold, I feel a sense in the air of actually this thing doesn't really work. There's also this thing of mindfulness and meditation is sometimes thought of as the same thing, and they're not. You know, mindfulness is a quality of attention that emerges in all sorts of contexts, and it's helped by the practice of meditation. But
Hmm.
not only, there are other ways of being mindful.
Of course.
You know, so you know, my walking when I'm going for a walk, I'm very often quite mindful on that walk, and I don't
Hmm.
mean the practice of mindful walking. I mean just walking from here to the gym, which I do frequently, or going for one of my long walks. It's just an opportunity to really settle into the environment and into myself.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a really good distinction to make between what is, in a way, the results of the method of meditation. But there is something I think about meditation and maybe deeper yoga that helps mindfulness be
Yes.
sustained over a
Yes.
longer period of time and
Yes.
to take it into different depths.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Well, you isolate your what's happening with your attention. You're
mhm,
setting up the conditions to discover what your attention is up to, and you
mhm,
have an intention to work with your attention.
mhm.
You're noticing and choosing, noticing and choosing, noticing and choosing. And it's that which makes the difference.
Thank you for that conversation. I think it really gives us a sense of where you're coming from in terms of your understanding of the field. And I'd love now to turn the conversation towards your teaching practice, what it means to be a teacher of these practices and how that may have changed since you started.
I think the process of teaching importantly involves listening to the person you're working with, really, really carefully listening to hear what it is as best you can that they're experiencing, to try to come into some kind of empathic resonance with the experience that the other person is having, and see if you can find a way that might possibly be helpful to them. And it's that immediate experience that you're really trying to understand from their side.
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that in terms of working with the organizations and groups that you've worked with in the past?
Yeah. When you're working in organizational context, so much depends on what you're allowed to do, how much time you're given, what's possible. Within the context of a typical group, you arrive in a room with a bunch of people you've never met before, and you do some things to gently warm things up, get people to chat in pairs or introduce themselves or whatever it is. Allow things to relax a little bit, get people to not be too cautious around each other. And then you might want to suggest a mindfulness instruction, and then get people to talk perhaps in pairs or threes about what they experienced, and then perhaps invite people to share. And it's in that sharing more widely that you can begin to pick up things that might be useful. And there it's about being as precise as you can be about what it is you're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Really reflect back, check, have I got this? Is this what you're talking about? Okay. And what we tend to find is when this sort of thing goes on, you might try this, or that's typical and that's normal.
So there's something about creating a psychologically safe
Yes.
environment.
Yes.
It helps people relax, helps people perhaps open up. And then you've got the inquiry aspect, which is helping you to understand
Yes.
and guide. Mm-hmm.
Indeed. Yeah.
How would you describe your philosophy surrounding your teaching?
I guess I think that minds are alike. It's the nature of humanity that minds are alike. And it's okay for people to have the mind they have, and for their mind to work the way their mind works, and my mind works like this, and your mind works like that. And that's all fine. As much as possible, what I'd like to do is to help people to be more at ease with their own minds, with the minds that they have. Yeah. Somewhere, I believe that we're all fine just as we are.
Mm-hmm.
We're all fine just as we are, just like this. We're fine. And there's room for a bit of improvement. And both of those things are true. And that applies to me and it applies to everyone. And if I can sit with being fine with the mind that I have, and aware that I can still grow, then maybe I can help people to catalyze some sense of that in themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being comfortable in your own skin, if you like,
Yeah.
but understanding that there's always something that one can work on, no matter how sorted we feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any experiences that you've had over the years that inspired you to teach?
Gosh, it's a big question. When I first started to get interested in teaching mindfulness, having completed my master's at Bangor, my friend Kieran Saunders and I hooked up with John Teasdale, one of the co-founders of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, who lives here in Cambridge. Mm-hmm. And John, Kieran and I ran a number of courses together at the Cambridge Buddhist Centre, secular mindfulness courses. We just advertised them as, I think, MBSR. But we recorded ourselves. We recorded the whole class, but focusing on our own teaching, our didactic process. And then between every class, the three of us sat down together and listened back to the recording and commented on each other's teaching styles and each other's use of metaphors or engagement with the group, or what we'd said that was helpful and what we'd said that maybe wasn't so helpful, and where we might have missed something valuable, or where we picked up usefully something coming from someone in the class, and gave each other feedback on that and discussed that. And it was an extraordinary process. And we did that for many sessions.
Great.
So I think the three of us really learned from each other in that process. I particularly found John's presence in that quite inspiring because, John was one of the founders of MBCT, and he'd really thought through what it was that he was trying to get people to do. He'd really thought through which mechanisms in the mind are we seeking to affect and how?
Mm-hmm.
And that was quite revelatory and very, very helpful. So I think that period of about 9 months or a year, I don't know how long it was, of giving each other detailed feedback on our teaching, that really helped me. And it gave me tremendous confidence, I think, at the end of the process that, there was something here that I could really go on with.
Mm-hmm.
On another side, I've done an awful lot of solitary retreat,
Mm-hmm.
month-long solitary retreats. I don't know how many of them I've done, a dozen more. And in the context of that, sometimes, quite profound insights arise. In particular, what happens when the default network shuts down, when you stop the inner chatter, when that just goes away for a sustained period of time, and one enters into a space of experiencing without an experiencer. You're not talking yourself into existence all the time,
Mm-hmm.
telling yourself the story of your life over and over and over again in tiny fractions. When you stop doing that, then another mode of being in the world emerges where there is no me and the world as separate. That separation goes away, and there's just an unfolding process, which is very joyful and very calm, lovely, rich. So those periods I find really valuable to reflect on, and they give me a strong confidence in where this thing goes.
Mm-hmm.
If we can begin to come into a different relationship to the narratives by which we talk ourselves into being over and over again, that we don't need to worry about not talking ourselves into being. It's actually fine. And we can let go of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel very, very confident in that process. And having said that, I think that, I have met people, very, 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 very few, two in my life probably, who have arrived at a class, sat down, crossed their legs, and got into the practice, and the default network just shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
Inner chatter just goes away. They get completely absorbed in the meditation. They come out blissed, with bliss written all over them. And apart from that, it's just not going to happen quickly for most people. Nor should it necessarily be a goal for most people, because I think to go there takes a certain amount of dedicated work. That's my understanding. Now, I've been fortunate in my life that I've had the conditions that I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I've been able to construct a life for myself that has supported my endeavors in that regard. So I've been able to go away on month-long solitary retreats and come back into quite supportive conditions. Most people, that's not available. But to
Mm-hmm.
get into a different relationship to the inner narratives, that is available.
Yes.
So hence the difference between awakening and wakefulness. It's this business of small degrees. And to the extent that you can begin to understand and befriend and accept the narrative processes that run in your mind without trying to push them away, get rid of them, force them to change, but come into a different kind of relationship with them, then things start to go in a much more positive direction for most people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are possibilities there, and over time, people will find their own path if they want to dedicate themselves more
Yes,
to it. Then that's up to them, really, isn't it?
yes, exactly.
And do you see any parallels between effective teaching and effective leadership?
Well, the thing that currently really interests me is executive coaching. I do work with some quite senior people, CEOs in organizations, people with quite heavy responsibilities. And the mode of work there is not so much teaching people meditation techniques, but it's still around the broad idea of what's happening in our own minds is affecting others. what's happening in others' minds affects us. And we can begin to work with our own inner attitudes in order to affect more positive change. So that I'm finding really quite exciting work.
Mm-hmm.
The coaching process and helping people who don't really have a great deal of time to think about these things, to begin to notice some of the processes that are running in their own minds and affecting the way they are in their contexts and how that
Mm-hmm.
affects others.
Mm-hmm.
And to begin to find perhaps more resourceful ways of being in the context. In that world, you meet someone maybe once every 6 weeks, and you have an hour and a half session, and you hear how things are going, and you hear how things have been, and you talk about what's currently happening right now and where this might go. So it's a tiny temperature take. And you're not hearing back from an organization of X tens of thousands of people how their CEO is impacting their lives.
Mm-hmm.
You're not reading right across the organization. So it's a slice that
Mm-hmm.
you're hearing.
Yeah. What impact do you hope is being had through your coaching approach with leaders?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's huge, really. And it depends on the values that you encounter. Look, people come to me because they've heard about me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they already, to some extent, know what it is they're likely to get.
Yes.
Yeah, because I have a certain whatever reputation, right? So that's already tuned it in a certain direction. But I tend to only work with people whose values I can resonate with. And what we try to do fairly early in a process is to begin to make it explicit what those values are. What really matters here? What are we trying to bring about? And then the question is really, how can I help to continue to make that explicit so that the leader and the people around them adhere to the values they espouse and enact them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't try to impose a set of values, but I try to discover a set of values. And if that set of values is one that I can work with, then that's what interests me. So
Mm-hmm.
it comes down to working with values. And the values include impact on the planet, impact on other
Mm-hmm.
people, creating an organization in which people can thrive,
Mm-hmm.
creating an organization which is helpful to customers, helpful to others,
Mm-hmm.
which, an organization which tries to do better.
Yeah. Sounds like there's a strong ethical component to that. And does the right livelihood aspect of the Eightfold Path influence that? Because
Yes,
I imagine your charitable organization in the past was also informed by a right livelihood approach.
absolutely it was. Yes, that's been a major, major concern for me over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Look, it's tragic that the world of work produces so much suffering. People in organizations very often suffer. Um, Organizations very often earn their living, earn their keep by doing things which aren't helpful
Mm-hmm.
to the planet or to human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, those aren't the organizations that I want to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But those that are seeking to make a difference and seeking to make things better, then I really love to work with that. And increasingly, I'm finding now that organizations that really do mean to do good stuff are beginning to have meetings with organizations, even in other sectors, that have a similar intentionality.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
that's hopeful. Yeah,
that is hopeful. It is.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Now we're coming to the latter part of the interview, and one of the themes that I have next is the future. What do you hope the next chapter is for mindfulness in the world over the next
Oh,
few decades, perhaps?
I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic. I'm just looking forward to discovering. And I
Mm-hmm.
have no idea what AI is going to gift us or not. And something momentous is moving in the culture, and where it is going to go, who knows? But look, one of the places it might go is it might leave us with massive unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly going to change the way people work. And if I were to be optimistic, I would say there was a tremendous opportunity there for people to find other ways of being with their minds and their experience. Who knows where that's all going to go? Something that saddens me quite a bit these days is I've begun to notice as I go about Gen Z people looking unhappy. And I completely understand it. You know, the person who's serving me a coffee in a cafe who's come out of a 3-year degree and sent off 3,000 job applications and hasn't even had a reply and is now selling me a cup of coffee, me who owns my own house and lives comfortably on a pension. I could understand a certain amount of resentment and a certain amount of a feeling that we've screwed their future. But my hope is that perhaps some of those people will instead discover that there's other ways of being with their minds and their mental states, and that there's a tremendous joy to be found working in a way which isn't to do with acquiring materials and acquiring stuff, the life of acquisitiveness, but instead something much more satisfying is available. And maybe mindfulness in one shape or form can really help people towards that kind of discovery. That would be fantastic.
Is there something about the rapid growth of mindfulness and the amount of organizations that are popping up who are offering training, teacher training, etc.? There are certainly lots of people being trained as teachers, but how does one actually get a foothold in this field as hundreds and hundreds of teachers are getting trained up every year? Do you see something that is of interest, of concern, or?
I'm a bit out of touch with the wider field, but I would say this, that if you can't immediately find students, perhaps you can teach other people to teach. There's also a question I have about the quality of teacher training. It's not always of the highest quality. People who are training teachers aren't always very experienced practitioners themselves or trainers themselves. So that's an open question. So
Yes.
I guess I would advise anyone who's interested in becoming a mindfulness teacher to deeply investigate any training program, especially in terms of the background of the people involved. And see how deep that goes as best you can, and to consider whether really you have access to participants, to people who want to be taught by you. You know, is it viable? Is it realistic? I don't know what the current state of the field is in the UK, but in my own case, you know, we stopped doing public courses and classes because they were dropping off quite a bit. I felt that the world of public courses and classes was being eaten by apps, and it was becoming harder to find participants from the general public. Now that's different, I think, in the National Health Service and mental health services. There's always going to be a need for trained people there because there are people who come along with very clear psychological needs. And I think organizations like Breathworks in the UK that helps people with chronic pain, you know, I think that's marvelous.
Yeah.
And there's no shortage of people with chronic pain who need help. There are possibilities there. But in the general public who are interested in mindfulness, so far as I can tell, seem to go to apps. So I don't know how many students people will find.
Yeah, I think the apps are sometimes a way in for people or a supplement when they haven't got the guidance of a teacher.
Okay.
But I think some people do indeed rely on them entirely for their guidance, which is a shame because that exposure to a teacher and to a community, to a group is so valuable, particularly if it's in person.
Yes.
But things are changing quite rapidly. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with all of that? But yeah, lots to unpack there. But I want to take you into I'd like to take you into the final quick fire round. And my first one is, what truth about mindfulness took you the longest to learn?
I think that minds are alike. I think that took a long time to really get. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite poem, favorite reading or quote?
You know, I'm sadly tone deaf to poetry. And so I tend not to. I know it's very often an important piece of a mindfulness program, but I tend to leave them out because they just don't move me in the way that they seem to move other people. I just listen to it and think, yeah, that's nicely written, but
Okay. Yeah. Fair
yeah.
enough. But what about a teaching? Is there a teaching that you think stands out for you?
A teaching that I go back to quite a bit is the Heart Sutra.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And why is that?
it describes the way things are.
Mm-hmm.
Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. Form and emptiness are the same thing. That things are of their nature conditioned. This is very important.
Yeah, great. Who or what is your greatest teacher and why?
You know, my understanding of Buddhism was baked in by Sangharakshita, my teacher. It's the way I see the world. It really is just the way I see the world. So there's no avoiding that. I've a profound appreciation for his teaching. It is how I see things. He really nailed it for me.
Super. If someone you worked with looked back in 20 years and reflected on what you offered to them, what do you think they might say that they learned from you?
Gosh, one's got to be modest, but I would deeply love it if anyone thought that as a result of our interaction, they'd been set on a path of exploring the nature of mind. I would love that. You know, that they'd continue to explore the nature of mind. Yeah.
Great. And where can people find out about your work and obviously your new book as well?
Well, my book is just on Amazon, so that's From Mindfulness to Wakefulness, Science and Practices on the Journey to Enlightenment. So you just Google me on Amazon, you'll find my various books there. But I have a website, mindfulnessworks.com, one word, mindfulnessworks.com.
Great. I'll put a link on my website as well for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing your story, sharing your insights, your practices, and your journey. And I'm sure listeners, whether they're mindfulness teachers or not, will take a lot from this conversation. So, yeah, very grateful. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thanks for the invitation and a great conversation.
Brilliant.